Mercedes says its new electric C-Class can travel up to 473 miles on a single charge. 473 miles. That is the kind of number that makes an electric car sound almost unstoppable. Charge it at home, leave London in the morning, and theoretically you could drive hundreds of miles before you even need to think about plugging in again. But there is a problem. Real roads aren't laboratories. Traffic doesn't behave like a test cycle. Weather changes. Motorways eat energy. Heating and air conditioning consume power. And if you actually use the performance Mercedes has given this car, that giant headline number can start looking very different. So today we're asking the question behind the provocative title. Is Mercedes lying? Well, not exactly. But the difference between what Mercedes claims and what you might experience in the real world is exactly why this new C-Class Electric is so interesting. Because this isn't simply a battery-powered version of the regular C-Class. It is a completely different machine underneath, designed from the ground up as an electric saloon and positioned directly against some extremely serious rivals. And Mercedes has clearly decided that if it's going electric, it isn't going to do it quietly. Look at the front. The first thing you'll notice is that enormous illuminated grille. Instead of trying to hide the fact that this is an EV, Mercedes has made the grille one of the most obvious design features on the entire car. It carries a huge three-pointed star theme, with hundreds of individual illuminated points creating a distinctive pattern across the front. The Mercedes badge itself is illuminated too, giving the car an unmistakable nighttime identity. It's bold, maybe even too bold. But you certainly won't confuse this car with a Tesla Model 3. The headlights continue that futuristic approach, while the overall body remains recognizably Mercedes. The shape is smooth, aerodynamic, and deliberately clean, with flush door handles and carefully sculpted surfaces designed to move air efficiently around the car. And that matters, because with an electric car, aerodynamic efficiency isn't just about making the car look sleek. Every little reduction in drag can help stretch the battery further. The C-Class Electric is almost 4.9 meters long and around 1.9 meters wide, giving it a substantial presence on the road. Yet Mercedes has managed to keep the silhouette elegant rather than turning it into a giant slab of metal. Move around to the back and the design becomes more restrained. The rear lights sit inside a dark full-width panel, with circular Mercedes-inspired lighting elements creating a signature look. It's modern without completely abandoning the brand's visual history. And then there are the wheels. You can get the car with 18, 19, and 20-inch designs, depending on specification. The larger wheels look fantastic, but remember, bigger wheels can also affect efficiency and ride comfort. And that brings us to something Mercedes understands extremely well. Luxury. Open the door, and the C-Class Electric immediately feels like a technological showcase. The biggest talking point is the optional 39.1-inch Hyperscreen, stretching across much of the dashboard and combining the driver's display, central infotainment system, and passenger display into one dramatic digital environment. It looks spectacular, but here's the question. Is it actually better? Because modern Mercedes interiors can sometimes feel like you're operating a smartphone with four wheels attached. There are menus everywhere. Climate functions can be buried inside the touchscreen. The steering wheel controls are touch-sensitive. And while this looks incredibly futuristic doesn't automatically mean easier. The good news is that the C-Class Electric isn't relying entirely on screens to create its luxury feeling. The materials are generally impressive, the door cards feel premium, and the switchgear has a reassuring weight. There are still a few areas where Mercedes could have done better, including some cheaper-feeling controls and interior components. But overall, this cabin has the visual drama you'd expect from a modern Mercedes. And the rear seats haven't been forgotten. The electric C-Class is longer than the combustion C-Class, creating useful passenger space, particularly for legroom. Headroom isn't quite as generous, especially with the panoramic roof, and the battery underneath the floor means passengers sit with their knees slightly higher. But this is still a comfortable car for long journeys. And comfort is really the personality of this Mercedes. Underneath the elegant body sits a 94 kilowatt-hour class battery, while the Launch C404 Matic uses two electric motors and produces roughly 480 horsepower. Mercedes quotes a 0 to 62 mph time of around 4 seconds. Think about that for a second. This is supposed to be a luxury saloon, yet it can accelerate like a serious performance car. And the electric motors deliver their power instantly. Press the accelerator, and there isn't a dramatic gear change or an engine screaming toward the red line. There's just thrust. A lot of it. In CarWow's test, the C404 Matic actually managed 0 to 62 mph in about 3.8 seconds using timing equipment, quicker than Mercedes' official 4-second claim. So the performance claim doesn't seem to be the problem. The range is where things get interesting. Mercedes quotes up to 473 miles. But during CarWow's mixed real-world driving test, covering motorways, city roads, and twisty routes, the car averaged around 3.7 miles per kilowatt-hour. That worked out to approximately 350 miles of estimated real-world range. That's roughly 120 miles less than the headline number. And this is where we need to be fair to Mercedes. That doesn't mean the company fabricated the number. Official range figures are produced under standardized testing conditions. They are useful for comparing cars, but they aren't guarantees of what every driver will achieve in every situation. Still, from a customer's perspective, the difference matters. If you're planning a long motorway journey, you aren't driving inside a laboratory. You're driving in the rain. You're using the heater. You're carrying passengers. You're accelerating. You're sitting in traffic. And suddenly that 473-mile headline figure becomes much harder to achieve. So perhaps the real question isn't, is Mercedes lying? It's, why do official EV range figures still feel so different from everyday driving? And that is a much more interesting question. The C-Class Electric does have strong charging capability, with DC charging up to around 330 kilowatts. That's fast enough to make long-distance travel considerably easier when you find a suitably powerful charger. But the competition is moving quickly. BMW's new i3, for example, is expected to offer a higher official range and faster charging capability. That means Mercedes isn't entering an empty market. It is entering a battlefield. And perhaps the biggest challenge isn't even BMW. It's Tesla. The Mercedes starts at around 57,995 pounds, while the C404 Matic versions climb significantly higher, depending on specification. That puts this car firmly into premium territory. And when you're spending this kind of money, buyers expect more than a good electric drivetrain. They expect a special experience. This is where Mercedes has a serious advantage. The C-Class Electric is quiet. Extremely quiet. With optional air suspension, the car can glide over rough surfaces with the sort of effortless isolation you'd normally associate with a much larger luxury saloon. At motorway speeds, the cabin becomes a remarkably peaceful place to be. And that's exactly what this car should be. It isn't trying to be a lightweight sports car. It isn't trying to make every corner feel like a racetrack. It's designed to make long-distance travel feel effortless. But don't assume it can't handle itself. The car feels stable and composed when pushed, and optional rear-wheel steering helps make the large saloon feel more maneuverable in tighter spaces. The result is a car that can move quickly without ever feeling nervous. And honestly, that might be more impressive than simply being fast, because the best luxury cars aren't necessarily the ones that make your heart race. They're the ones that make a 300-mile journey feel like 30. Then there is practicality. The C-Class Electric has a 470-liter boot, which is useful but not class-leading. The real party trick is the front boot. Mercedes gives you around 101 liters of additional storage space at the front, and you can access it by pressing the Mercedes badge and lifting the bonnet. That's a clever touch. It feels like Mercedes has actually thought about how EV owners use their cars rather than simply removing the engine and filling the space with electronics. So where does that leave us? The new Mercedes C-Class Electric is not perfect. The range doesn't appear to match the headline number in demanding real-world conditions. The touchscreen-heavy interior won't appeal to everyone. Some of the cheaper interior details feel strange in a car this expensive. And competitors are already pushing harder on efficiency, range, and charging speed. But then you drive it, and you understand why Mercedes has built it. This car feels premium. It feels quiet. It feels fast. It feels technologically advanced. And most importantly, it feels like a Mercedes. That's something many electric cars still struggle to achieve. The question is whether that experience is worth paying a premium for. Because if your priority is maximum range for the money, there are alternatives that may make more sense. If your priority is outright efficiency, Mercedes has some serious competition. But if you want an electric saloon that combines performance, technology, comfort, and genuine luxury, the C-Class Electric suddenly becomes much more interesting. So, is Mercedes lying? No. But Mercedes' 473-mile figure should be understood for what it is, an official test result, not a promise that you'll drive 473 miles every time you charge. And that distinction is incredibly important, because the real story isn't that Mercedes made an impossible claim. The real story is that the electric car industry is reaching a point where customers are starting to look beyond headline numbers. They want to know what happens on the motorway. They want to know what happens in winter. They want to know how quickly the battery charges. They want to know how comfortable the car is. And ultimately, they want to know whether the car is worth their money. On those questions, the Mercedes C-Class Electric has a surprisingly strong answer. It isn't the range champion. It isn't the cheapest. And it isn't necessarily the most exciting EV in the class. But as a luxurious, fast, and incredibly quiet electric saloon, it could be one of Mercedes' most convincing electric cars yet. And perhaps that's the real reason this C-Class matters. Mercedes isn't simply trying to build another EV. It's trying to convince you that the future can still feel expensive, comfortable, and unmistakably Mercedes. And on that mission, I think they've come surprisingly close.